Hi, I'm Jeff Davis of the Sonoma County Wine Library Association, and thank you for watching this visual oral history. We're here in the home of Hank and Linda Wetzel on the property of Alexander Valley Vineyards. And what a view you have here, Hank.
It's a beautiful spot. We love it here. We need people to remind us once in a while because we live here every day. But
yeah.
We do live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, really.
And what a history you have here on this property. And you've had most of this, not quite all of it yet, because you've been expanding, but most of it for nearly 60 years now.
Yeah, goodness. It has been that long.
Time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah, my parents bought this property in December of 1962. We've had it a while. My mom and dad bought the property sight unseen. Not sight unseen, they'd seen it, but they'd never been over the fence, never stepped on the property. But they were friends with the Green family across the highway, who was beginning to do a little grape farming, and when they were asked to partner with them, they did so, and bought the property and had an idea to plant wine grapes on it. It was a cattle ranch, so they kind of took hold of that and never let go.
Your father worked at Garrett and was in kind of the airline business and had a chance to travel. He and your mother traveled the world, got to see some of the great wine regions. And
they did. They traveled in jet aircraft, both commercially but also in private jets. His company was based at the Los Angeles airport, and as head of the Garrett Corporation, he worked on a small turbine engine, and that really didn't do all that well as a supplier of power to corporate jets. I mean, they sold quite a few, but there were other markets for that. Auxiliary power units on commercial jets that powered the plane when it sat on the ground. And they also made a lot of money eventually developing turbochargers, first for trucks and then for cars, as part of that, as an offshoot of that project. But having corporate jets at his disposal at the LA airport made it easy for them to come up to the Sonoma County Airport. And I'd oftentimes take the station wagon down and pick them up. And they'd bring guests, and they were so far thinking in their work on the buildings here. They restored the old Alexander schoolhouse, which is here, the adobe, which Rufina and Cyrus Alexander built when they first came here in 1842. Wow. And used those as guest houses. So that was a
little later on, though, right?
Well, that was in the mid and late 60s.
The schoolhouse was somewhere else, and they purchased it and moved it over here.
It was a quarter-mile away. The county had it on 2 acres, which Lydia Goodyear, who owned the Goodyear store, owned. She used it as a barn for a few years. My mother convinced her to sell it to her, and we moved it and restored it, and still use it as a guest house today.
So when your father purchased this property and planted a variety of agricultural products and also grapevines, what was his motivation with the grapevines? Do you think he was planning on?
Well, the sales work that he did took him to Europe a lot, so he was exposed mainly to French wines. I developed a hobby of tracking first and second growth wines. I was the sommelier at home. So my parents, not knowing a lot about wine, didn't buy first growth wines, but they bought second growth wines and stocked a cellar. I found all those little chateaux, privately owned, fascinating, and so the idea of making wine got into my head at a fairly young age. And we started planting grapes in 1964. Took our first load of grapes to Robert Mondavi Winery in 1968. And I went to the University of California at Davis, met my wife Linda there on the first day of school. And we graduated in 1974, and then with my parents' help, put a partnership together, and Linda and I built the winery in 1975.
I want to back up a little bit. When your dad purchased this property in '62, how old were you at that point?
I was 12. So.
Okay. And Katie was?
Katie was 6, 5 or 6.
And you had a couple other siblings.
Yeah, 2 other siblings. So,
Yeah.
we were all quite young, and the original attraction to the Alexander Valley were the swimming holes in the Russian River. So we would come up here and spend all our time in the river for a long weekend during the summer. And this property was bordered on the west side by the Russian River and went up just beyond the house here into the hills. Cyrus Alexander selected this spot because he had year-round water in this spring-fed creek next to the house.
Wonderful.
So the idea of planting wine grapes here was made a lot of sense to my parents. My dad was convinced that the jet engine would take Americans to Europe. And they'd drink fine wine there and want to come back and enjoy
Continue to drink
wine at home.
fine wine.
And so he felt wine grapes was the best crop to plant, not knowing anything really about agriculture.
Yeah.
But he
Well, you
he had that vision, and it came true.
You jumped right in when you moved here, and I heard
Right.
at a young age, and at $1.50 an hour.
I think
That's
that
what-
was a little later. I think my first wage was $1.25 an hour. But,
I was gonna say, for 1963 or 4, that's a pretty good wage for a kid.
yeah, I guess so.
That's not even child cheap labor.
Well, and my mother and father realized they needed to get some professional help in here, and so they hired a consultant from the Napa Valley, Ivan Schock. And Ivan, later on, about a year later, found them Dale Good, who came up from the Delano area in the San Joaquin Valley, and he moved to this property and oversaw all of the vineyard development for us. Introduced this area to trellising so that we could mechanically harvest fruit.
And you were the first to do so in Alexander Valley?
I believe so, yeah. Robert Young right after us as they began to plant grapes as well.
I was surprised to see a vineyard crew here in some of the older photographs still from the 60s. So
Yeah.
you got going pretty well initially.
We've got some older photographs of a crew planting grapevines and grafting them, grafting onto the rootstock. But that was really specialized ag labor, and we had to find that workforce, and we were fortunate to have them.
And back then it was the older 12-foot spacing between the vines.
Yeah, spacing was 12 feet between the rows and 8 feet between the vines, and that the whole place was like that. And so as we advanced and replanted over the years, in the 60s, my parents started at one end of the property and planted all the way across to the other end. We really had no thought about microclimates and what grapes might go best where. And but then, because of the phylloxera infestation that happened in the late or all through the 90s,
Yeah, in the 93 or
we
so.
began replanting, and a lot of that was done at 2 meter spacing with vines closer together.
And initially, was it Cabernet Sauvignon?
It
Or a couple other
was,
varieties?
we planted 8 red varieties and 8 white varieties. Again, not knowing what would be successful or popular.
Was that kind of a
But-
test to see what would do well and what didn't?
Yes, but Cabernet Sauvignon was the biggest planting. But we also had Chenin Blanc, Riesling, Chardonnay, Gewürztraminer, Merlot, Zinfandel, and Pinot Noir. And we, at one point or another, have made wine from all those grapes. Oh.
And what point did you bottle your first wine?
Linda helped bottle our first wine, our 2000 or our 1968 Cabernet Sauvignon, which was actually wine made at Pedroncelli Winery.
Oh.
For a barrel of wine, we gave them some grapes, and we bottled that out here back in the Adobe. But commercially, the first bottling took place in 1976. The Riesling that we produced that year, and we set up. I purchased all the equipment for a bottling line, and we bottled wine with that equipment for about 10 years,
Okay.
and eventually outgrew it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, maybe it's time to bring in Linda. Should we do that? So Linda, when you joined to help bottle as the girlfriend at that time, correct?
Correct, yes.
Did you know what you were getting yourself into?
No idea at all. I'm originally from Oakland. My degree at Davis is political science.
Oh.
I did an internship in Sacramento while he was doing an internship in the wine industry. But after I graduated and things seemed like they were going in the direction they were going, I took a couple of bookkeeping courses at the JC.
Wow.
And I've been doing the books ever since.
Wow. Well, so it sounds like you almost expected to be with this man for a long time.
I was hoping, I think.
Yeah? Oh. He caught
Well,
your
we got
attention.
married very soon after we graduated, so.
Uh-huh. Great. Yeah, I saw that you were doing hand bottling for a little while, but
Yeah.
then you advanced beyond that.
Oh yes, we have a machine or bottling line that automatically fills things. It clanks away down there for a good half of the year. So we're producing almost 200,000 cases now. So
Tell me about, and we're backing up again, the first harvest, when you were involved with, I guess, the winemaking at that point, and you were bringing in the first Chardonnay, and everything was all exciting. You were starting to get into the big business of the winemaking, and
well, thankfully it was a cool growing season. So we didn't pick any Chardonnay till the 20th or 22nd of September. And I was scurrying around trying to get everything in place and ready to go while the winery was being built by a construction crew beside me. And we had 3 non-family members partners in the winery then, and they were all here. And I was a nervous wreck. And we brought the grapes into the winery, weighed them, and I pushed the button to turn on all the equipment, and nothing worked. I was devastated.
I saw that your quote was, "I was devastated."
The partners came back up here to the house, and I called the electrician and the plumber, and a couple hours later we had everything working, and we were able to process our first grapes.
That's not the first time I've heard a story like that.
Yeah, and it was so disappointing because everything I'd worked on it for a long time, had it all set up.
So,
It was going to work, but it didn't.
so what was that, about 1975?
1975.
And but then that Chardonnay, I understand, received rave reviews.
We did really well with it. I apprenticed in Napa Valley in 70 through 74 at a number of wineries. Joseph Phelps, Freemark Abbey for 3 years, Stony Hill. And Brad Webb was at Freemark Abbey as a partner there, but he kind of took me under his wing and taught me a lot. And I used his formula to produce the Chardonnay, adjusted the barrel aging a little bit, and did it my own way. But anyway, the wine that we ended up producing from that vintage was very popular. We tell the story of getting in our little blue van and going down to San Francisco, and every restaurant, every shop you walked into, which was in 1976, would buy.
Oh,
They'd buy a case, 2 cases, 3 cases.
You would do a taste with them so they knew what they were buying? Oh, no.
It was a different world. It was a different world. There were a lot of wine shops, and they had to have all the new wines. So as soon as Hank went in with a new product, they had to have it on the shelf.
But it was well received, and we had a lot of repeat business.
Yeah, we did.
And by this time, it's 76?
Late 76, yeah.
Yeah, so the Paris tasting had just occurred.
Right.
So there was an enormous
saying.
interest in the
Timing.
wine from this area.
Yeah. And thus, the interest that we saw when we went out and knocked on doors. It was great.
Yeah, boy, that's what timing
Yep.
on your part. And then Katie joined a year later?
My sister Katie came to work after she graduated, and she had an ag econ degree from Davis. And in 1980 or 81,
Trying to think, she's 5 years younger than me, so
yeah,
probably 79, 80.
yeah, and she came to work as our national sales manager. And by then, my production was starting to increase, and the volume of wine that I had to sell was increasing, and I really needed that help. So she did a lot of traveling. It's one of the most difficult jobs in the wine business is getting out and hitting the road. And you have to do it to be successful. And we've all done it. Even Linda.
And that's a responsibility that has not shrank over the years.
Yep. So we've spent a lot of time in the Texas marketplace, our number 2 market in the country after California. Mm-hmm. But Katie did all of that in the early 1980s. So
Great.
She had her hands full.
Tell me about the Sins In. I love the label on that. It's kind of carnal, but yet playful, and just
Definitely playful. We came up with the name Sins In at a poker game of all places.
that's a surprise.
I was experimenting with the fruit that we had here. In 1978, we sold Zinfandel grapes to another winery, but I went out and picked the second crop fruit. Mm-hmm. Zinfandel typically sets a fairly large second crop. I don't think I picked the grapes till early November. But later that winter, or perhaps the next spring, at the poker game, at the dessert break, I ran out of the winery and got a sample out of a barrel for people to taste. And they all said, "Well, this is really good, but it tastes a little high in alcohol." And Katie was at the game as always, and she said, "Oh, we could call it Sins In." And everybody laughed and said that would be good. But she said, "Hank, you send in for the label approval to Washington D.C."
And did you have a label by?
We
this time?
actually, Dennis Hill, who worked for me and was helping me in the cellar, came to work the next day with this anonymous artwork out of his college textbook.
Wow.
And so
He was an art history major.
so we used that on the label. And the first
Copyright
application,
free then, huh?
the first label we sent into Washington came back with a big red rejected stamp on it.
Not surprising.
So I just threw that in the trash, filled out another form, and sent it back in, and came back accepted. So we started selling Sins In.
And that led to Redemption.
Redemption's In eventually, and we also made a wine called Temptations In. We're not making that anymore, but that was a fun trio of Zinfandels.
That you called the Wicked Weekend, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Temptation, Sins In, and Redemption.
Yep.
I like that. About 84, Alexander Valley, the wine growing region, received the federal AVA approval. Mm-hmm. And I understand you were part of the committee and helped make that happen.
I think I was the head of the committee. It's all kind of a blur to me because there was, I just wanted to see this happen. And there were 2 groups. There was the group from Geyserville South that wanted that to be the AVA. And then there was the group from Cloverdale that wanted to be included. Mm. And they were eventually included, but it just seemed to take forever to get the appellation approved.
I was going to ask if the process was moving a little quicker back then, but it doesn't sound like
it didn't. It didn't seem like it was moving quickly to me. I think it took a year from start to finish. That was a while ago, and that was really at the kind of one of the busiest times of my career with 4 children and running a winery and growing the business. It's one of the things that I did, and I don't remember it very well.
And I imagine Linda was doing a lot more than too at that time.
Oh yeah,
Pretty busy time for everybody. Because we were also, it was very easy to get distributors. We talked about how easy it was to sell the wine. It was also easy to find distributors throughout the country because they were looking for new wineries too. And the Sonoma County Vintners Association went on tours to the East Coast and the South, and we all went looking for distributors, and you got them. It was great. But that also meant they all came back here, and they all needed to be entertained. So we were doing a lot of dinners in our house, even though we had 4 children, the oldest 8.
Yep.
It was crazy, but it was fun. You know.
Oh, I imagine it was a lot of fun.
And people didn't mind how laid back and informal it all was. Had to be, but it worked.
Even though you were busy, you came up with this Cyrus brand in like '75. It was, in a sense, your reserve wine with extended aging. And
Cyrus was our tribute to Cyrus Alexander. Cyrus and Rufina Alexander settled here in 1842, and
that's an hour story in itself.
it is.
Almost.
But I began to create Cyrus in, I think, 1985 was my first vintage, and we basically took the best Cabernet Sauvignon lot that we had to create the Cyrus, and it also it's a Bordeaux blend, so we have some Malbec and Cabernet Franc and Merlot in the blend. So that was part of the marketing plan for that wine. It received extended barrel aging, and we finished the barrel aging for 12 months in brand new French oak. So that gave the wine its own personality, its own character.
And
So,
that thing has picked up accolades from here in Northern California to Texas to England.
yep,
Great
we've
Britain.
won a lot of awards for that wine, and in fact, at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, we've won awards there for Cyrus. 3 times we won Best of Show there for that wine.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you've raised a lot of money for the fundraising.
We did. We've raised over $500,000 for their fundraiser.
I noticed in the previous years you had come real close to $500,000, but just discovered this morning that you won in 2021 as the Best of Show once again. So
We
that
did.
was like another couple $100,000 you raised
Yep.
for the fundraising. That's fantastic. You created Cyrus, but then your winemaker Kevin Hall came along in about 1998, 99, and he's been probably doing it ever since. And he has remained to this day.
He has been here ever since. I made the decision with a lot of input from Linda about whether or not we were going to stay the same size or grow the winery, and we decided to grow the business because we had 4 children, and they grew up with the business and they were interested in the business. So we made the decision to get a little bigger, and Kevin Hall was a big part of that decision. He came on board to take over the winemaking from me. It was hard to let go of that, but as I love to tell people, he makes better wine than I ever did.
Well, that was the right decision.
Yeah, we made the right decision, and he, after the first year and a half, I guess, he basically had total autonomy in producing the wines, creating the blends, and he's been doing it ever since. And he does a great job. So that was the right decision, and he's helped us grow and expand our production of all the wines that we make, and allowed me to spend time in the marketplace. I don't do that as much as I used to, but
Yeah.
spend a lot of time in especially the Texas market, but go to other markets as well. So
Linda, Hank told me a little earlier that he had an idea to do some sparkling wine, but you pulled the plug on that one.
Like, we did it one year, and I thought it was good, but we
Not
had
terribly.
a lot of popping bottles, which was a little,
Oh, okay.
a little scary. Hank said, we've got to get rid of this really fast before they open.
Yeah, there's always a learning curve with the sparkling wine.
So just one year.
and we started the project, and there wasn't much competition, but by the time we brought product to market, 3 or 4 French companies had started making sparkling wine in the Napa Valley, and I threw my hands up and I said, I give up. I'm not going to do
We didn't
that.
have the right equipment either. Hank said we
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah,
have
yeah.
It was a big investment to modernize that whole production technique for bottle fermented sparkling wine.
Yeah. Around 2006 is when you decided to build the caves and dig into the ground and.
The first cave we built in 1998, and then we added on to it in 2000, and then in 2006 we began our second expansion of the cave. And we've just broken ground 2 weeks ago on a fourth expansion of the cave.
And you're going to be up to how many square feet now?
About 26,000 square feet.
That's
We'll
great.
have 14 or 15,000 60-gallon barrels underground.
That's underneath your cemetery hill, right?
Under Cemetery Hill, and then back behind that. And when we built the winery in 1975, there was a plan in the back of my head to utilize that hill space for underground barrel aging, and it's worked out great.
You didn't come across anything when you were digging under Cemetery Hill?
No, and in fact, the hill is all clay soil, so it's actually pretty ideal for cave construction.
Oh, great.
And eventual barrel aging, because the clay holds moisture, giving the cave humidity, but it's not, there are no creeks or waterfalls in there. Sometimes you hear about people building wine caves and they end up with a creek running through their cave.
Right.
So,
Well, it's nice that you don't have to use a humidifier like some wineries do.
right. And the temperature is very constant and quite cool, so it's a perfect environment for that.
You must have felt blessed that your parents lived to 2008 and saw the great success that you were able to bring to the business.
Yeah, I mentioned to you a while ago that he made a contribution to the Hillsburg Hospital in the funding, helping to fund a new emergency room. And so he didn't pay any federal income taxes for about 3 years after that. And suddenly my tax bill was way bigger than his, and he got a big kick out of that. So that was one of the offshoots of our success. We, as the winery got bigger, we began to consistently make money each year. Everything we could, we pour back into the winery, didn't we?
Hank likes to call it forced savings.
Sure.
The winery is our forced savings account.
We never had a lot of cash, but we had a big winery. And we still do.
But it was really gratifying to see that success,
And your parents got to see that.
and they sort of didn't believe it was happening because of where they'd started
Oh, yeah.
in the early '60s. So it was fun to see the look on their face when we showed them the financials at the end of the year.
Oh, I bet.
That was
Yeah.
that was fun.
And it's one of those love stories where one passed away and then your mother went first and then your father died just a few months later.
Within 3 months of each other. And my poor mother had Alzheimer's and a horrible disease, and she was physically in great shape until the Alzheimer's began to take everything away. And so we always thought that she would long outlive my father, who was a heavy smoker until he had a heart attack and quit cold turkey. But he outlived her, and mentally was as sharp as a tack, but physically he was falling apart. And I think really he died of a broken heart. They were World War II bride and groom. They met at a officer's dance in Hershey, Pennsylvania in, I think, very early 1945, and were married 4 months later, 4 or 5 months later.
Wow.
My mother was 19, and they drove across the United States on their honeymoon and to Edwards Air Force Base, where my dad was stationed in the last few months of the war. But they really lived the California dream. They came. My dad grew up in Santa Monica, but he went to work for the Garrett Corporation and realized these entrepreneurial successes. And in that respect, it was kind of like being in the wine business, because there's so much upfront work and money that you spend, and you don't see the results for quite a while. But anyway, they lived a great life, and the idea to buy property in the Alexander Valley was not quite a whim, but they knew that they just loved the area. They loved the climate here and the weather here.
Recognize the potential.
They recognized the potential of the soil here, and felt that it was a great place to grow wine grapes. And that's what happened.
I didn't think to ask, how old were you two when you got married?
We got married in 1974 when we were 24 years old. So, 23 years old.
Same age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And now your sons have been working with you for a while.
We have 4 children. The 2 youngest live in San Francisco. Each of our children have two kids. So we have 8 grandkids. Our 2 oldest boys work for the winery full time. Harry is now the winery manager and lives here on the ranch, and Robert is our national sales manager. And he lives on Southwest Airlines, I like to say.
So he's doing the traveling now.
I've been there and I've done that. My sister Katie's been there and done that. So it's part of how you make the winery successful.
It's his turn.
Yeah, his turn. He's actually based in Chicago, so he has quick turnaround and can get to any part of the country fairly quickly. So.
Yeah. And now the 4th generation is coming along, huh?
With those 8 grandkids, they're at the time in their lives where they're up here a lot, and we are often inundated with all the little kids on the weekend.
But you must love that.
Linda especially loves that, we have a lot of fun seeing them up here.
And Harry's 2 children who live right here, they work off and on at the winery, help serve events for me. And
Yep, Henry was just
boxing wine.
waiting table last week at an event that we did here.
It's fantastic.
But he also works on grunt projects at the winery.
Which is just what all our kids did. They all worked at various times at the winery.
Yeah, Hank was telling me that too. When he was interning, he was pulling apart redwood barrels.
Yep, redwood tanks at Simi Winery. When was that? Goodness, 1970?
It'd be 70, yeah.
Yeah, right after Russ Green bought Simi Winery.
Well, what a legacy you have grown and continue to grow at this point, and it could go endlessly, huh?
Well, I often scratch my head and think, how did all this happen? But it happened with a lot of hard work and kind of a vision for where we felt we could move the business and grow the business. Fine wine is part of a better life, and so as society progresses, there's more opportunity for wine to be part of that, and we've seen that in our planning. It's something that doesn't happen in a hurry. It's a very slow process. But to create a little luxury like a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon or a bottle of Chardonnay and have people enjoy it is very rewarding. And
Sure.
And at the same time, the business is so competitive. It's tough, but in the long run, that's what makes you successful. You're always working to make a better product. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I love about the business. You've got to stay on your toes and you've got to be paying attention. And we sit on the back porch here oftentimes with a glass of wine talking about what we aren't doing right or what we should be doing next or that sort of thing. So
Excellent.
A lot of family input.
Well, you are making fine wine, and I'm also impressed with the lower price wine you're still able to make at this point.
That has always been one of my goals. Certainly my wines aren't the least expensive in the marketplace, but they are really well made, estate bottled for the most part, and that says to the consumer that we have a consistent grape source, the winemaking is consistent, and we're able to offer that wine at a price point certainly below our competition in the Napa Valley, but even below a lot of our competition
and you
here
can reach
in Sonoma County.
Reach a wider breadth of consumer too with the range of prices.
With
very
that-
hard to have it be
With that
accessible.
combination with that value, the combination of quality and price, we are able to extend our sales all across the country. We sell in all 50 states, and so that works well.
Yeah. Well, Shasta has arisen, and I think that means that it brings the interview to a close.
Okay.
But thank you so much for allowing us to come into your home and hear your fantastic story, and we wish you great success.
Thank you for considering us and having us tell the story. It is a kind of a dream of a story. It's happened over our lifetimes, but it's worked out well, and we've enjoyed it, had fun doing it.
Okay.
It's always an adventure. I love that about it.
Well, thank you for watching this visual oral history. I'm Jeff Davis on behalf of the Sonoma County Wine Library Association. We'll talk to you again soon.